Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the UNSW Scientia Education Academy Lecture Series, a forum for educational thought leadership delivered by our UNSW Scientia Education Fellows. My name's Sarah Madison. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Education and Student Experience here at UNSW, and I'm really delighted to welcome you all to our June Academy Lecture. I'd like to acknowledge and celebrate the Bidjigal people, who are the traditional custodians and the first educators of the unceded lands that I'm on today here at UNSW's Kensington campus. And acknowledge it's a real privilege for us to work, teach and learn, and for some of us to live on beautiful Bidjigal country. And I pay my respects to Indigenous elders past and present. I also extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues joining us today, and acknowledge the various lands that you may be joining us from. The Scientia Education Academy is home of about 50 fellows, appointed from across UNSW's 7 faculties, including Canberra. And these are the UNSW's most outstanding educators who share a real genuine passion to inspire students and the champions of educational excellence through their expertise, vision and their scholarship. The Academy's lecture series aims to raise really important issues about the future of learning and teaching in higher education more broadly, and drive high-level conversations and collective work towards global best practice in learning and teaching across Australian higher ed, well, indeed globally. Commencing in 2018, the Academy's lecture series are recorded and shared on our education website, and I think we'll see that in the link in the chat. And to date, these lectures have reached well over 3,000 people, which is just fantastic. And today, the Scientia Education Academy is really delighted to host a pioneer in employee mental health and wellbeing, Professor Paula Brough from Griffith University, speaking today on the topic of positive strategies for university wellbeing in turbulent times. And this is obviously a really important topic for us, given turbulence rather than good old boring change seems to be the new normal. So Scientia Education Academy Director, Professor Patsy Polly, will introduce Paula in a moment, and she'll also facilitate the Q&A session at the end. So just a little bit of housekeeping. Patsy will do the introduction. Paula will speak for about 40 minutes, and I encourage all of you to really join the conversation and participate in the lecture. And please feel free to post comments or questions in the chat during the presentation, and we'll absolutely have time for a Q&A at the end, and there's a Q&A function there, and Patsy will pick up that at the end. And note that the lecture is being recorded and available post-event. So over to you, Patsy. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you so much, Paula, for joining us today for our public science education lecture. I met Paula through the Wattle program, and it was with great pleasure that we started talking about all the things that we do in our universities. And I thought, yes, Paula, please come and join us at UNSW. So Professor Paula Brough is the Director of the Centre for Work, Organisation and Wellbeing at Griffith University. She's the Director of Work, Organisation, Wellbeing at Griffith. Paula's primary research areas are occupational stress and coping, employee mental health and wellbeing, work engagement, work-life balances, workplace conflict, and the psychosocial work environment. Paula has received over $8 million in competitive external research grant funding, has authored over 60 industry reports, over 150 journal articles and book chapters, and has produced 12 scholarly books based on her research. Paula is recognised as one of the top 50 work-family scholars globally and is listed in the top 2% scientists for work wellbeing research. Paula is a Fellow of the European Academy of Occupational Health Psychology and a Fellow of the Asia Pacific Academy of Psychosocial Factors at Work. Paula is an Associate Editor of Work and Stress, Deputy Editor of Stress and Health, and is an editorial board member of the International Journal of Stress Management. Wow, Paula, what an amazing profile. Thank you so much for joining us, and over to you to start your presentation.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Patsy and Sarah. It's a complete honour to talk to you all today, and I hope that what I'm going to talk through is of interest, and I'm very happy to answer questions as we go, and I'll make a copy of the slides available to anyone who's interested at the end, and you're also very welcome to email me directly too. So as Patsy said, we met at Wattle, and we were talking about women's leadership and what's going on in our universities. And so the suggestion for having a discussion focused on work well-being, focused around our university lives came up, and I'm very happy to facilitate this. My background is in organizational psychology, so a lot of the work I normally do is with high risk of stress occupations like the emergency services, emergency departments, healthcare, and a little bit with universities, and you'll see that's becoming an increasing high risk of stress environment, unfortunately, but I'm still very positive that there's more we can do to turn this around. So I'm just going to talk through some of these things today. So hopefully, let me just check, hopefully my slides will work. That could be a disaster. Here we go. There we go. I might just have to change them manually. Why aren't they working? Sorry. Where did
Just
check?
click on the title page and then progress.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. Just a bit slow, I think. Here we go. So as Patsy says, I'm the director of one of the research centres in the Griffith Business School up in Brisbane. And I'm not going to go through it, but our passion is work-related research. We produce a lot, as you do, a lot of research evidence for the work we do. We're highly ranked for the publications, highly cited, and work with both national competitive grant funds and commercial research. So it's a real privilege to be leading such a fantastic group of people in this research centre. And I must say, I really enjoy my job. So I'm hoping some of that will shine through with what I'm going to tell you today. So let's start. This, of course, is what we're all aiming for. The perfect job. And if I asked you to think about, okay, what is your perfect job? I'm hoping some of these characteristics would come up. We know from the research evidence, this is what commonly makes the perfect job. I mean, maybe you want to retire and cruise around the world or something, but if you have to work, this is the sort of work you want. Work that's engages you feel energized by, you can use your skills and talents in an appropriate way, you have a challenging level of work demands, but not too much, which is a crucial issue. I'll come back to that later. You want a clear and accessible and equitable promotion path. Perfect job would have highly supportive colleagues. You like working with people, you enjoy going to work, you would have a fantastic manager. I'm hearing lots of positive things about UNSW, so I'm sure this applies to all of you. Your manager is generous, supportive, and fair. You've got perfect work hours, good work-life balance to suit your own preferences. You've got great pay and conditions, great location. And of course, you feel so excited about work, you can't wait to go there each day. So that is what the perfect job looks like. This is what we're all aiming for, really. And my point of starting with this is really to work out how far away from this are each of us at the moment, and how obtainable is this? I mean, I don't in reality think that any of us have these characteristics. Maybe we do, maybe you'll contradict me of how great UNSW is, but we'll see. What does the evidence say about university work? The evidence isn't quite as glowing, and in recent years, the dark side of university work, as we're all aware, has increased, the intensity and the pressure of it. So this is what the research evidence says. So even about 20 years ago, the late Tony Winefield and colleagues in Adelaide was doing work on university staff well-being, showing that it was adversely associated with university income pressures, with student-staff ratios, and staffing levels generally, which is what we would expect. And certainly I would say 20 years later, we're still having the same issues with those characteristics. University staff tenure, so the more experienced staff, the people who've been around the longest, have the lowest job satisfaction and the lowest trust in their senior management compared to academic staff of have younger tenure, as less tenure. This work, especially for academics compared to professional staff. We know university workers are increasingly reporting high levels of stress, primarily caused by high workloads, and the retention of high quality academics, teaching outcomes, and the university's rankings in domestic and international markets is increasingly affected by employee health and well-being. So that's something that we talk to our managers about, and sort of a guiding force to help improve staff and well-being. If you want to go up in the rankings, this is something that will assist you to get there, as well as all the traditional methods. We know there's been quite a few inquiries about precarious work and sessional academic staff. We know that those staff members tend to be the ones associated with the worst types of career progression and lowest levels of well-being. And there was this interesting article looking at, from the UK, this one was, looking at, they call it a university staff wellbeing crisis. This negative culture around emphasizing performance above everything else. And we know there's clear evidence that that is generally associated with adverse staff wellbeing, which is characterized, for example, by the undermining of academic professionalism, reduced academic freedom, increased job insecurity. So as I said, that was an interesting article. They called it a staff wellbeing crisis. And there was an interesting report a couple of years ago by Gail Kinman and colleagues from London in the UK, looking at how university staff well-being, both academic and professional staff, is lower than other worker population norms, tend to have lower levels of work-life balance. Over half of UK university staff report that they regularly perform unnecessary tasks, job tasks. So that's the admin that we all struggle with. 30% of university staff were experiencing significant levels of psychological burnout. And the way to remedy that, so accessing the university provided counselling services or support services, was primarily associated with the universities that had positive cultures. So where you have a more negative culture, there was less help-seeking behaviour, which is an important point to note. So you can see the contrast between the two slides. We have the idea of the perfect job, what we should all be looking for, and our universities perhaps used to have more of that perfect job characteristics, and the reality of what we're encountering, or most of us are encountering now. The university workforce, as discussed at the beginning, is going through a highly turbulent time, as are many of our workforces. And some of these issues are generic across a number of our workforces. Certainly, we're seeing it in emergency services and healthcare as well. So health and well-being is certainly become a more prominent issue, and I'll talk about why in a moment. We're seeing huge advances in technology and digital tech, which is good, but means lots more changes coming through for us. And change is always very difficult to deal with, especially managing change, so it's not an extra burden on staff. So we're seeing in the literature these new terms: techno-invasion, techno-overload, techno-complexity, which are related to the amount of high job demands, the amount of stress that university staff are experiencing. We know that our work hours seem to be increasing, but more importantly, it's not just the work hours, it's the intensity of the job that's increasing. So job intensification, where we're working faster and expecting more outcomes, has been increasing over the last few years, especially since COVID, I would say. One of the ways we look at dealing with high levels of job demands, high levels of stress, is the amount of recovery opportunities that workers have. So, and the amount of downtime you have in the evening or at the weekends, and how perhaps either ourselves personally or our universities can help us have that recovery time. We're certainly seeing reduced opportunities for recovery, and there's a couple of strategies that can be put in place to encourage that recovery, like, for example, reducing email traffic on a Friday afternoon, for example. Some universities are doing that, and I'll be interested to find out what UNSW strategies are around that. We're seeing in our universities, there's been a couple of inquiries, increases in reported conflict between staff, harassment, bullying, sexual harassment, and amongst the student populations too. Staff are reporting reduced control, decision-making and opportunities. So all in all, things are not quite as perfect in many of our universities as perhaps we would like them to be. So as I said, this is occurring across the board, not just in the university sector, but certainly I would argue that many of these issues certainly apply to us, and especially post-COVID. So most of the stress claims, most of the mental health stress claims submitted by university staff are due to work pressure, far and beyond anything else. Nearly 50% are due to work pressure. So the workload and the impact the negative impact that has on feelings of well-being and our mental health. And we know from recent inquiries, there's been an increase in the reporting of harassment, bullying and harassment, especially sexual harassment on our campuses by staff and by students. Increased reporting in a way is good because people are starting to acknowledge this issue and starting to address it rather than just sweep it under the carpet. But obviously the incidences of this are now in a place where we have to directly address those issues. So it's not as great a picture as perhaps we'd like to be, as we'd like to think. What has caused these issues and what is happening at the moment? So post-COVID, COVID was really interesting because it highlighted for many workers, especially those in our universities where we had to make that jump to, a very rapid change to work from home and online offerings. There's this issue perhaps that worker well-being, our own levels of health and well-being have become more important to us. So the idea, not just in the university sector, but across many of our sectors, is a resistance to the long work hours culture. And in fact, it's often called, especially in the US, this masculine contest cultures, where you compete to say, I worked a 12-hour day, I worked a 14-hour day, I'm so busy today, I can't do this. You almost wear that busyness, those long hours with pride. We're seeing a shift away from that now for people to say, well, if you can't get your work done in a set decent time of work hours and have time to do something else after work, then something needs to change. It's not necessarily a badge of honor, a badge of pride anymore. So I would argue that that's a positive, actually, to move away from those masculine cultures. We've seen recently, including in some sectors of the university, not so much in academics, I'm afraid, but for professional staff, this move to a 4-day work week and how well that's working. We hear from our colleagues in New Zealand, especially, that that's received very positively. So that's not where you cram 5 days work into 4 days, but where you just work a little bit more smartly over those 4 days. So you have a 3-day weekend. Lots of workers in many sectors are conducting that sort of work, and that has been associated, those evaluations are associated with improved productivity for those workers and improved well-being. So as I said, there's been this switch by many workers, including university staff, about the value of your own time in terms of work time and non-work time, whether that be with family or with sport or with walking your dog or whatever it is. So there's been more of a pushback against the long work hours, and I would argue that's a positive. We're seeing, especially with the new generations coming through, reduced loyalty to our organisations and increased movement, increased mobility of workers. That has an impact for our universities. And we're also seeing another positive, which is increased inclusivity in the workplace. Many of those increases are influenced by new technology coming through. So, for example, more facilities for people with disabilities or neurodivergent workers to be able to be actually engaged and advance in workplaces. And above all, I feel that there's been, or we've seen the evidence that there's this reduced tolerance for misbehavior, which is why, as I said just now, some of the rates are increasing, some of the reporting rates are increasing for bullying, harassment, bad behavior by staff, managers, for example, because many workers are just saying it's not appropriate and have more courage to call this out, which is a positive, I would argue. All of this is happening as well as this recent change in legislation by all the Australian states and territories now to emphasise the psychosocial health and safety of workers. So as well as the physical health and safety of workers, which our organisations have a responsibility for, there's now legislation, I'm sure many of you are aware, that organisations, including our universities, have a legal responsibility to look after our psychological health. So where those health infringements are chronic and haven't been addressed appropriately, we're seeing employers sued, taken to court, forced to address these issues. So this is a good thing, but it's meant suddenly staff well-being is highlighted more than ever and in the news more than ever. And there's all sorts of work being done in this area. For example, we're involved in a linkage project looking at how sexual harassment across many organisations, including our universities, can be related to this research and related to health and safety legislation to make it more almost more amenable for organisations to actually address, rather than it being put in the too hard basket. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's something that we're seeing a change in. So I hope this is making sense to you. I'm whizzing through this fairly quickly. So really what I wanted to say was we've done this work. I've worked in this area a long time, my whole career. And I started off looking at stress and burnout at high-risk occupations, primarily with the police and emergency services and how it relates to well-being. We've picked up issues around gender equity and work-life balance. We've been working in that area a long time. I'm involved in a recent project, or lots of projects, looking at increasing diversity across numerous industries, firefighters, butchers, all sorts of things. We've looked at how these issues relate to leadership, the types of leadership that our supervisors, our managers demonstrate to us. And now we've seen direct relationships between a manager's leadership style and the impact they have on their own team's well-being. We've done lots of work in this area. Above all, over the last few years, as this work has generated, above all, I can see all of these issues are embedded in work culture. This is not something new. We've known this for a long time. But instead of looking at silos of work where we just look at work stress or we just look at leadership, increasingly I'm saying, okay, none of that is as important as looking at the workplace culture. And I'm going to spend the rest of this talk emphasizing that. And it's not just the university culture. You know, our university execs love them, but they love to stress, you know, the positive work culture, blah, blah, blah. That is important. What's more important is the local culture. The culture in your own department, in your own school, in your own faculty, in your own team. So increasingly we're doing work looking at how do we change culture at a local level, be that in a particular police station, for example. There might be some areas of your university, I know there is at Griffith, where you're aware that maybe you don't want to work in that particular school or department because the reputation isn't as great as for it to be a place of work as some other schools or departments. I'm not going to name names, but I'm sure you can. And that's primarily to do with the work culture, the local work culture there. And what influences that? It's the leader, the manager of that local team, local department, local faculty. I'm not trying to put all the blame on the heads, but the leading person or of the lab, of the research lab, the leading supervisor is the one that guides and influences the local culture the most. And I just wanted to bring this up. So to start, my talk started with this idea of the perfect job. Again, it's a two-way street, the perfect job, but also the perfect worker. The perfect worker, like the perfect job, doesn't really exist. In fact, most workers are split between these three groups. You have people like us, who are great, highly engaged, they're at the top, building the wall, working hard, want to see improvements in their workplaces, in their universities, publishing, working hard, bringing in the money. They're fantastic. They're the workers you want. The really motivated PhD students, research fellows, academic staff you have. That's about 25, 30% of any staff at any workplace. Actually, the majority of staff, about 50%, are in this middle group, not really engaged. So they'll do the work, but they won't go above and beyond too much, which maybe is a good thing because they're looking after their well-being. But really, the job of a good supervisor is to try and move people from that middle group up to the top. How do you get that middle group who are doing okay, but could do more, to be honest? How do you get them to be more engaged, more productive in their workplace? And importantly, how do you prevent them from falling down into that bottom group? That group of workers, also around 20-25%, who are more destructive. So they're the ones at the bottom who are maybe biding their time until retirement, very cynical about their work, highly disengaged, very critical of university leadership, for example, not open to change as much, not open to new opportunities. And crucially, they're the ones that can bring down people from that middle group to join them. We see this a lot. I do a lot of work with the police. We talk about, no offense to those in the police, but we talk about, crusty sergeants who get the new recruits coming in from the training colleges, and they come to their station and they're saying, okay, well, you might have learned how to do X, Y, Z at the training college, but in reality, this is how we do it here. This is the workaround we use. So that level of cynicism and disengagement is then contaminated, is contagious, is contaminated to new engaged staff. So a good leader probably can't do much about that highly disengaged group at the bottom. But as I said, they can prevent more people from that middle group falling down to the bottom. That's really what you want. So that's the work a lot of us are doing, looking at work engagement and how to keep staff motivated but healthy and thriving in their workplaces. And as I said at the beginning, for various reasons, including what's happening in our university, work well-being is a really busy field at the moment, which is good. After 30 years of going on about mental health in the workplace and feeling people were just totally ignoring me, I'm really pleased to see it now becoming an issue that we can talk about. It can be addressed, and I can see our university leaders are actively trying to improve these issues for many of us. So there's an increased recognition that an optimum work environment is crucial, and we know that it's linked to, as I said, attracting and retaining good workers, high-performing workers, the ones we want. It's important. I talk to my own university exec endlessly about this. They're probably totally fed up of me banging this drum, but it's really important that all those engagement staff surveys we do, all of that sort of stuff we do is based on evidence-based training. Evidence is based on evidence. Yeah, I have a very short span of attention for those consultancy type surveys and programs that have their place perhaps, but I would argue are not based on evidence. So what is the evidence? It's an increased recognition that there's a system approach to addressing our workplaces. It's not just something that the worker can address or their manager, but it's a system approach. So you think about how our universities are trying, for example, to reduce the level of changes we go through, to improve our work days so that we're wasting less time on unnecessary tasks, especially the admin tasks, for example. Some universities, of course, are doing that better than others. There's a focus on having manageable and sustainable workloads. So that's also been such a hot issue post-COVID. We're all well aware of how much our workloads have increased. And now I feel the pendulum has started to swing back for our management, university managements to say, you know, you can't just have X number of staff who are teaching intensive and give them all the teaching or whatever. Workloads have to be sustainable in order to improve staff wellbeing and engagement and retain those staff that we want here. We're seeing lots of work looking at, I don't like to just blame the manager, our supervisors, the deans or whatever, but we're seeing a lot of work linking, as I said, the leadership style of our managers with has direct links to the well-being of their staff, the mental health of their staff. And we're seeing in some organizations, and including our universities, that is now a KPI of the managers. Okay, you had your faculty produce this many pubs, this amount of funding, but how many stress claims have they put in? How much turnover have we had? So there's issues around what the manager can do to improve the psychosocial safety of their staff, as well as to improve their academic workloads, academic performance. And a genuine focus on staff engagement above and beyond those rather simple surveys, I would argue is required, and there's increasing recognition of how to do that. This is a bit of a whistle-stop tour. So here's some recommendations. As I said, a focus on the local culture, whatever that means for you, whatever team it is that you lead, your lab, a department, a school, a faculty, a group, whatever it is, a research center, whatever it is you lead, the focus on the local culture, I would argue, is crucial, because that's what you can influence. That's what you can change. It's very hard to make any substantial change to an organizational level culture. That's really hard to do. I'm not saying it shouldn't be attempted, but that's really difficult. But what you can change is the local culture. And that stems, as I said, from having a positive leader there, whether that be the dean, the head, the director, the program director, whatever it is, a positive leader who role models good behavior, role models good work hours, role models help and support of staff, and really upholds decent work practices. A good culture then is characterized by high levels of support, protection for your team, protection of your staff against all those higher up demands coming down the chain to staff. You know, there's a level of protection that's needed, I would argue, and a good leader will do that. Genuine teamwork, so working together to a really clear goal of what it is the department, the faculty, the research lab, the research center is working towards, and having a zero tolerance for misbehavior. So when you see bad behavior of whatever kind, it's called out. It's not tolerated. That's obvious, but it's still surprising. We do a lot of work on bystander behavior. It's still surprising how often people are silent, especially in meetings when people are interrupted, people are talked over, some demographic members are ignored, or their suggestions are ignored. It's still very surprising how often that happens. And if you look out for that in a meeting, you'll see that yourself. You'd see how often a female, a younger member of staff is ignored, or their suggestions are presented by someone else, and they get the credit. So it's interesting how often that happens. Common red flags to look out for. We know this already, but fear of speaking out is a good one. So at the end of a meeting, I hope it doesn't happen here now and that I've said this, but at the end of a meeting, when we say any questions, any comments, and there's just silence. I remember we had a dean, I don't mean to speak badly of Griffith, but we had a dean who gave a big presentation, blah, 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 right, any questions? And we all had lots of questions, but nobody either wanted to be the first, or wanted to raise any particular issues, or wanted to talk about the most important elephant in the room, which was whatever it was at that time. So there was just this horrible silence at the end. That is not a good thing. You want people commenting. You want, please ask me a question at the end, or I'll be totally distraught all day. But you want people engaged and talking. So a fear of speaking out, that culture of fear and of distrust, is an obvious red flag that maybe not all is right in a particular department or faculty or research centre. Micromanagement is another one. Lots of people at the manager level, as we know, academics get put in these positions, not necessarily have the best type of training, or even any training at all, of how to be a good people manager. We're doing quite a bit of work around that with organizations. So sometimes that lack of management experience comes out in the worst ways, and micromanagement is one of them. We have had, I'm sure you have, so many leaders who like to micromanage. That's not the way to be a good leader. You should be able to trust your staff, trust where they're working, trust their performance, trust they're doing what they say to a certain extent, without the micromanaging, without the indecision, not being able to make decisions, also a characteristic of a poor leader. And just this, stifling communications, as I said, this fear of speaking out. Also, one thing I wanted to raise, we did some work about extremely toxic leadership behaviour. I'm not suggesting any of this applies to UNSW, but we did this work in some of the Australian universities and in some external healthcare organisations too. So where you have a really difficult supervisor, a really difficult leader of, head of faculty, a dean, or an exec of some kind, it can make, we've all been there, make your work life exceptionally difficult. And we've talked to people about how to deal with that. There's formal routes, you go to HR, you record everything that's happening, you write it all down. Sometimes we've had to say to people, and I don't want to say this lightly, but sometimes you've had to say it's impacting your health and well-being, your mental health so much that you can't sleep on a Sunday night because you're going into work on Monday. You walk into your building and have this sense of dread. You have this sense of just walking on eggshells the whole time in your workplace. If you've got to that point, you really have to work out what's the best way to improve your own levels of mental health here. Is it going through the formal methods, reporting things to HR, keeping a record of what's going on? That might work. But equally, we've had to say to people, perhaps consider walking away. Is the fight really worth it? So that's a little bit contentious, I know, but we can see in the long run, I can see for your own health and well-being, sometimes walking away from a really difficult work situation is the best for you personally. Okay, nearly there, wrapping it all up. I've given you a whistle-stop tour of university well-being, really workers' well-being today. I just want to emphasize a couple of points. So work well-being is the responsibility of both the worker and the organization. We know that. As I said, our organizations now have a legal responsibility for making sure our working environments are psychologically healthy, are safe for us. And really, you want to be working towards that perfect workplace. You want to be in a workplace. We want our universities to be places that both our students and our staff flourish in. That's what we want. So there's joint responsibilities for tackling misbehavior. There's a lot of emphasis on the individual side of things, and I would argue, with my organizational psychology background, the emphasis should be more as well on the system, on the organizational side of things. A worker's focus on their health and well-being continues to escalate. That's a good thing, I think. One thing we're seeing more and more of is, a sort of a resistance, an increasing resistance amongst our PhDs to carry on, to come through and to become young academics. I find that very concerning. I'll be interested to see if that's the experience with yourselves there. Talking to colleagues in other universities, there is this sense that, some of our PhDs, some of our research fellows are saying, yeah, this academic life, for whatever reason, is not for me, I'm getting out. So I think that's concerning, but they're also looking after their own well-being in that extent. So that's interesting. Our universities' environments have intensified, our work has certainly intensified, and I think most universities still are struggling to balance a high performance culture with their workers' well-being. I don't think anyone's got that right yet. We're still working towards that. And I just want to acknowledge there is positive insight. So there is a sense that change is required. The first step of any change is acknowledging that change is required and a genuine desire to create some sort of change, not just at the exec level, but as I said, down at the local levels. That's where you can make some change. Flourishing work environments, that perfect job is what we should all be aiming for, however sort of much of a utopia that might be. But flourishing work environments are characterized, we know the evidence tells us, by high levels of trust, support and autonomy. That's what we should be aiming for in our universities, and for manageable workloads. That's the key, really. So we focus on our immediate local work environment. That's one recommendation I do have. How much can you change what's going on around you? What can you influence what you see for your team, your own personal team? Be a positive role model. I don't mean to sound too Pollyanna about it, but I just feel that's what we can change and influence the most, more than the university levels of things. So I hope that makes sense. For those who are interested, a lot of this research, Gail Kimman and I wrote in a book recently, Wellbeing at Work. That wasn't just for university sector, but across numerous of our work sectors. And that's got some really interesting chapters from key people in this field. And if you're really interested in the toxic leadership, psychopaths in the workplace sort of research, I always joke about it because it's a really interesting lecture, even though it's a horrible topic. One of my previous PhD students, Vicky Webster, and I wrote up some of her PhD work about that. So that's about not how to be a toxic leader, but how to identify if you have a toxic supervisor and what you can do personally to cope with it. And as I said, one of the recommendations is certainly consider moving away. That's it. Thank you. Hope that made sense.
Thank you so much, Paula. Everyone, virtual clap for Paula if you've got the right click button action. So Paula, we've got so many questions in the chat, so don't despair. Okay. They've happened there. Are you able to view them, or would you like me to read them out for you?
I don't think I can see them. The chat doesn't have any.
Right, it's a question answer tab, so that's the one. But I might start.
Yes. Okay.
I might start with Ching Lee's asked a couple of questions at the beginning and now more recently. So Ching is asking, I'm wondering, do you know why job intensity increases? Could it just be due to the rankings? And you've also talked about psychological safety, but yes.
Yeah. Oh, it's mostly because of digital. So remember 20 years ago, we didn't have emails. We had memos that took 2 days to find us. We had a couple of days to respond. And then we sent it back 2 days later. Or remember journal articles you sent off in the post to the US. It took 10 days to get there, 10 days to get, So work intensive, the pace of work has increased primarily because of technology. If you don't answer an email in half an hour, you're getting a phone call as to why not, So the pace has increased primarily because of technology, I'd say.
That's very true.
I can see those questions now. Patsy, do you want me to go through them, or do you want to?
Yes, please do. So
Yep.
Sarah's the next person.
Well,
I'm starting from the bottom up.
Oh, you're starting from the bottom. Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, okay, Sarah, yeah. Do you have specific evidence-based tips about moving the middle half of teams from slipping down? Oh, yes, okay. From slipping and avoiding. Yes. Okay. So everything I talked about really, Sarah. So that's about engaging your staff, moving them up, having a specific goal, trying to make the environment a pleasant place. Think about that perfect job. How can, I sound a bit Pollyanna, but how can you make your team enjoy coming to work? What is it that needs to be done? Maybe it's the environment, free coffee. I've seen that in some of our universities now, some of our, not us, but some of the exec have free coffee and things. But what is it about the work environment, staff development, being in, yourself being a great leader? I'm sure you are, Sarah. What is it about you that you can influence your team to help them flourish and be supportive in their workplace? I think it's key. I think it's down to you as a leader, I'd say. And I'm sure you're doing a great job from what Patsy's told me. Have I sucked up enough, Patsy? I hope so. There we go.
Yeah, perfect. So, one from Rachel.
Are highly engaged staff more likely to become? Oh, that's an interesting one, actually, Rachel. Are they likely to become? Yes. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I'm not sure. Actually, is the answer. I think there comes a point, because there's this issue with tenure. I think there comes a point where, as your tenure increases, as your experience increases, it was interesting that there then was a high level of disengagement, especially with the uni exec. And I think that's due to, you're a great performer, you're a great academic, but you realize whatever you do isn't going to change what's happening at the exec, and you have very limited opportunities to do that. So I think tenure is an interesting characteristic there for becoming more disengaged, and we're seeing people, especially senior females, leave once they hit a certain tenure. That's increasing, but I'm not sure if highly engaged is the same, would relate to being disengaged. There is some evidence around the dark side of engagement, which touches on the workaholism stuff. So being too engaged in your work touches on being a workaholic. We don't want that anymore. We're trying to avoid that. But yeah, that's an interesting question. That would be a great research project. Jodie, in the higher education setting, from what I've experienced and heard from others a lot of the time, it can be the manager. Yes. Well, managing. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What we've seen from the work we did with destructive leaders is, you're right, Jodie, they're often very good at managing up. So people above them think they're a great leader. And often that sort of leader is brought in when there's a particular issue to be solved, usually an economic issue. So in times of difficult economic times, which many of our unis have at the moment, a leader is brought in who can, cut staff, reduce programs, do XYZ, have the economic situation more favourable, turn it around a little bit. But those leaders, not always, but often, are the ones who have less people skills, less people management skills. So then we might see coming up more complaints, more staff absenteeism, more stress claims, mental health claims being submitted. So you're right. It is all about the culture. It was about the characteristic of the leader. I totally agree with that. How teams can manage the culture without the manager. That's tricky. But I would say, I mean, it sounds a bit Pollyanna, but you look out for yourselves. You do what you can. I'm aware there's instances, for example, of the professors getting together to look after a school or a department because the head was so particularly difficult at one point. So the professors got together and were helping in the background, managing younger staff, junior staff, and staff were coming to them to avoid the head. That's not ideal, but if it helps staff well-being, I would say that's better than getting everybody, you know, in a real distress way.
Thank you.
Kayleen? Oh, Patsy?
Can I just add to that, Paula? That's an interesting concept of, again, we're seeing a lot of middle out approaches starting to emerge. So that could be an interesting way to look after staff who are coming up through the ranks, also supporting our leadership must also struggle with some of this as well. So the strengthening of the middle tier might be a good approach.
Definitely, definitely. And we focus some of our people management training, basic training on the middle managers. So it's not just the high levels, the execs, but it's on the middle managers. How do you help staff perform? How do you deal with bullying, harassment between staff when you're a middle manager? We've done quite a bit of work on there. Kayleen, are you aware of any research on the effect of the behaviour on students on workplace wellbeing? Oh yes, of course, of course. The reason why universities, emergency service workers, healthcare workers are at high risk of stress occupations is primarily because of dealing with the public, dealing with difficult public, including students. So if we didn't have the public, if we didn't have our students, I know we'd all be out of a job, but it's the dealing with the difficult public. You think about police officers, you know, no one's ever pleased to see a police officer. They got to deal with that issue. They got to deal with being spat on, with being potentially attacked, being threatened. All of that makes dealing with the public so difficult. That's what makes being a police officer a high risk of stress occupation. The same for university staff. You will know there's a small group of students, no offense to any students on here, who cause us the most problems. If we didn't have those, life would be a lot easier. So there's a lot of evidence about that, Kayleen. I agree that starting point needs to start at the local culture. Senior level leadership at the central level influences. Yes, I agree. There's a high level of psychological and even when they need to. What would you advise to address the systems level psychologically unsafety? Look, all I'm talking about really is what we can change. So there's a difference, as I said, between the organizational wide culture and what we feel we can change there. If that culture is particularly adverse, it should be addressed. I'm not suggesting we ignore it, but it should be addressed. But typically, that's a slow moving beast. What is more useful, I would argue, and would have immediate impacts on your well-being and your staff's well-being is what's going on locally. So senior academics, by all means, should speak up to the exec. We have all those engagement surveys often telling our execs what a bad job they're doing. So they're often aware of that. But what we can change, I would suggest, is more at the local level. I hope that's answered your question. And Ching, again, what are some strategies an introverted team member can use to raise concerns? Oh yeah, okay, this is a good one. It's difficult. It's really difficult to have an honest conversation with your manager if you don't like their approach. I would suggest that you're probably not the only one who's experiencing micromanagement, for example, from a manager. There's probably a few of you. Perhaps there's an open discussion that can be had with some colleagues and you talk in a group your manager. I'm not suggesting, sorry, managers, supervisors on this call, not suggesting you're all ambushed, but it's often safer and healthier to do it in a group. And because then they understand that it's nothing about you personally, it's perhaps their leadership style more generally across many people. And there can be ways that can be changed, okay? But yeah, I totally accept there's an issue of courage there. I totally accept that. How can you tackle the subject of culture? Okay, that's very similar. Yeah, if you don't, you have to have a think about this. If you don't like the culture in your head, in your department, in your school, in your faculty, what can you do to change that? Is there a group of you who can talk about it, can discuss this? Is there an emphasis on some sort of change, some sort of development that can happen? There's formal routes, so HR can advise certain managers that perhaps they need to improve their people management skills, go on these leadership courses, which may or may not be effective. But I would say there's a if you're able to have an open conversation in a school department meeting about what's going on, that would be the way to do it. What can we do better for next year? How can we keep staff, retain staff more? How can we improve staff's feelings of engagement and satisfaction with the school? Here's some ideas. You can make it more general than focused on the head generally, but focused on the head specifically. But yeah, that's a difficult one, but it certainly is possible. What else we got? I've gone up to...
So Paula, we've got time for one more question. Sure.
Have you got one, Patsy? I've got one from Laura. A question from Jessica. The 4-day work model interests me. With the research you mentioned that shows the benefits, does that involve full salary? Yes, you get a full salary for 4 days. Yeah, the issue certainly for academics is it's a little, most of the work for 4-day weeks has been trialled with professional university staff in universities. That's been trialled with professional staff, and that works quite well, because often their workloads can be capped at the end of the day. For academics, that's a whole different can of worms, as we know. So even just working a regular full-time load for academics is fairly rare. So the weekend work, the evening work, we would not be unfamiliar with that. So the idea of reducing that further, I haven't really seen that work that well with academics, I must say. But happy you might consider being a role model, UNSW, and trialing that. We'll come in and evaluate it. Go for it. Thanks, Patsy.
Unreal. So yeah, we've got like 1 minute on the clock. Okay. So according to my run sheet, there are questions in the chat. So I might encourage you to, if you have time, to reach out to our folks. Wow, lots of questions in the question answer chat, Paula. So people aren't fearful of contacting you, that's for sure. So this is great news. Good. Wonderful. So thank you very much, Professor Paula Brough, on spending time with us today for our Scientia Education Academy talk. Everyone, if you've got a couple of minutes to spare, please share your thoughts about the event by completing the short survey. I'm sure, Paula, if you're okay with it, to contact folks post this, or if you want to reach out through us, please do so. Yeah, the survey link can be found in the chat for those of you who've got time. And Paula, thank you so much once again, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us, colleagues, so many of you on the line. It's been a wonderful 1 hour sharing with Paula. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you, Patsy. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.